What's up, people? I had a question today come to me from Twitter where I am constantly talking about website performance and just how to squeeze a little more speed out of your website. As part of this ongoing discussion, question I commonly get is, well, why is my site slow? It's not really so much what can I do to speed it up. It's trying to understand, well, why is it so freaking slow right now? And then, of course, the back-end answer question that follows that is, well, now what can I do? Now that I understand it, what can I do? So anyway, I want to take this opportunity today to give you some insight into what I see when I look at a website, because I'm coming to find out and coming to understand that it's just not what I see is not well understood. But hopefully I can unpack some of this for you today, really show you the nitty-gritty details and help you understand when you look at and analyze a website, like what the heck is actually going on, why is it slow, what are the problems, and then what can we do? All right, so let's take a look. So I've got a site pulled up here. It's from a friend of mine on Twitter. His name is Adam Townsend. This is just a simple blog site, okay? The homepage, we're looking at the homepage right now. The homepage is a typical blog homepage. It shows 8 blog posts. He's got an image associated with each one. We'll call that a WordPress featured image. And the issue, and there's not much in the sidebar. A basic about me picture, link, some social icons that aren't even appearing, category links, and then some stuff, another link with an RSS feed being pulled in from his other website that's about Scrabble. So all in all, this is a very simple homepage. There's not a lot going on here. It's just basic. And because it's basic, it should be fast. But in reality, the website is not fast. In fact, it's taking, when I run web page tests, and I'll be returning to these as we discuss all the little details here. So I ran a web page test. It says the load time is about 7.213 seconds with 39 requests. The load time's terrible. The number of requests, not that outrageous for a WordPress website, but sort of outrageous for just a simple blog homepage. And then the total kilobyte load on the homepage is really 3.125 megabytes, which in my view is enormous, especially for a page like this, because he's got 8 posts with like a featured image on each one. I'll give him an allowance up to about 1 megabyte for this page, but it really shouldn't be any more than that. And it certainly should not be taking 7 seconds to load. This thing is running on Cloudflare, and so that is a caching layer, a pretty advanced form of caching layer, kind of a cache plus a CDN, content delivery network. Any site that's equipped with all that should be super fast, but here's the thing. If your baseline level of optimization is poor, so like if your site is poor performing in the absence of caching or a CDN, it's not going to get that much better when you introduce those extra layers. You kind of have to do a lot of things right, commit very few of certain types of sins, and then when you add that caching layer, you can get a nice boost. But in Adam's case, his site should be significantly faster than it is right now, even with no caching. Okay, so we're gonna look at some of these, some of what's going on here through the lens of pure performance and about the sins that are currently being committed here. All right, so let's take a look. So I come to his site, I load it up, I assess what I see. It loads a little bit slowly, a little bit kind of in pieces. The stuff above the fold is coming up pretty quickly, but again, in the testing, it's really poor. And so I would expect, like, if I were to click through to his site from a Twitter link, for example, and I was at, in line somewhere in a coffee shop or something like that, it would be very slow loading on my phone. It would not be a good experience. So let's dive in and see exactly what's going on. I'm going to use this web page test as a guide because this gives information, specifically the waterfall feature here, gives information about the resources that are being loaded onto the current page. And, it gives information, lots of information about those resources. Let's take a look. It tells you stuff that's not working. It tells you stuff that's slow. Gives you some insight. You can even drill down into details. Like, I'm going to look at this image here. This image is 1.5 megabytes, a single image that gets loaded up onto this page. That image could be made significantly smaller in terms of file size. I know this straight away. This is half of the page size on his homepage. It's just one big fat image that needs to be optimized. So it's stuff like that. It's insight like this that gives us some direction here about how we can improve website performance. But So I'll come back to the waterfall and some specifics here in just a bit, but for now I just want to dive into the code. So when I'll view the source code, so I'll come to a site, I'm starting to analyze it, I run that web page test. Now I'm going to take a look at the actual source code to see what is there that doesn't need to be there or that's overkill, and just to get an idea for this current environment. And when I say the current environment, what I mean is this. This is a WordPress website. Every WordPress website is going to be running a theme. So it's going to be running a theme, and it's going to be running plugins. Both of these pieces of the puzzle are extremely significant. Themes seem like sort of an innocuous decision, like, oh, I wanted my design to look like this, so I chose this theme. That's how most people approach theme selection and just the whole idea of themes in general. In reality, there's about a zillion. The theme sets up everything else. It sets the table for all the performance of your website. So if the theme commits performance sins, these performance sins are now baked in, and you've got to dance around them, accommodate them, work with them, whatever you got to do to get the results you want. And in most cases, people just live with the largesse that the theme introduces. The same goes for plugins, and this is an even more uncertain and sort of Wild Westy type landscape. Plugins are limited in the way that they can incorporate assets into your website. Just because of the nature of the WordPress theme and plugin system, they kind of have to do some heavy-handed or ham-fisted sorts of implementations just to make sure it works everywhere, because this minimizes their support concerns. But in reality, a high-performance implementation looks nothing like your basic, you turn on a plugin and it just works. That type of implementation is probably not a high-performance sort of implementation, and in fact, it probably is actively committing a lot of performance sins. So anyway, with that big disclaimer out of the way, let's dive in and look at the code. And you'll have to, my apologies, because this code is being run through the Cloudflare CDN right now, so it is all minified, compressed, concatenated, so we don't have nice, pretty line breaks all the time. We do in some places, but, I'm going to try and tell you what we're looking at, since it's sort of a jumbled mess. But I'm going to go deep into the details here. So we'll start right with just the HTML markup itself. This is the opening HTML tag. This does not need to be a big thing. This should be like, 30 characters or less. But this theme has decided that it is a good idea to spit out 8,000 freaking CSS classes to allow for more flexible layouting capabilities for this theme. This is absolutely overkill. I'm here to tell you right now, there's zero chance even a fraction of all this crap is getting utilized or leveraged. This stuff is probably not applicable to 98% of sites that have ever used this theme, whatever theme this is. And yet this stuff gets conveyed on every single page that ever gets rendered by this theme. So you can just, I look at anything in computer science, anything output that is output like this, and I just multiply by 1 billion. And if you multiply by 1 billion and find out that you've got 11 billion more bytes of data than is necessary, well, then you've identified a major source of waste. This is wasteful. This doesn't affect performance that awful much, but it just sets the table and tells me that what I can expect from the rest of the theme, and that is kitchen sink. Everything has been thrown in here. There's been zero performance optimization. There is no curation of features and the way they are delivered. So this is a lazy theme, I can already tell you. All right, let's keep going here. Next, we've got a script that is incorporated from Cloudflare to accommodate Internet Explorer 8. That was a big issue 8 years ago. It's much less of an issue now. We've got JavaScript that's been concatenated. So in a non-CDN environment, so if he was not running Cloudflare, we would probably see many, many JavaScript files being included by the various plugins and by the theme itself. One of the performance enhancing things that Cloudflare attempts to do is to combine all of those CSS and JS files together and then serve one file that has them all lumped in there together, and that's actually going to be quicker. So we're going to look at this. It's just, so this isn't even, this appears to be a specific to Cloudflare JavaScript file that actually has nothing to do with the functionality on the page. We will keep moving. And again, I'm really just highlighting stuff that, like, this is here, this is unique, this is here because. This is the approach I'm sort of taking here. we've got a prefetching for the Google fonts. So prefetching is a great technique. It's something we employ when we want to fetch resources from a third-party domain, so like not from this site, and then bring them into the fold. This starts that process faster and allows browsers to take advantage of threading, stuff like that, and to serve those fonts more quickly. In this case, we actually have the prefetching repeated once. So this is done once, and then it's done again. It's not necessary for that to be done twice, but again, this is a combination of a lazy theme and who knows how many plugins, and so you're going to get some oddities such as this. This is what happens when you work with WordPress and just go with it, with this whole pick your theme, layer on your plugins, and hope for the best. This is what happens. All right, and then in addition to the prefetching, a prefetching is generally sufficient, and in my testing, it actually produces a higher performance, faster result for users. So what I mean when I say it's faster for users, I'm being very nuanced there. You can test a web page that works a certain way, and it might test better, but in terms of actual user visibility testing, like if you're pulling it up on your phone, it may actually appear to load faster in the one that tests worse. Splitting hairs here, you know, this is not applicable in all cases, but we often find this with Google fonts. There is a faster JavaScript way to incorporate them, which this thing is using the Google Font Loader, or it's a variation of a JavaScript snippet that's known as the Google Font Loader. The Google Font Loader is supposed to be faster than a direct call to to Google's API to load up the fonts. But when you use prefetching, which this site is doing, and then just use the basic calls to Google's font CDN, that actually ends up being faster for visitors and produces less of a flash of unstyled text, or FOUT as we call it. That approach is better in my estimation. So this thing does all the right things to make that approach work and for it to be good, and then it goes and does this kind of cryptic Google Font Loader. And not only that, it's loading up a ton of fonts. I see PT Mono, Comforta, Nodo Sans, Aramo. We've got 400, 700, and 700 italic. So 400 is regular weight. 400 italic is like normal italics. 700 is bold, and then the bold italics. I mean, this is a lot of weight. All of these fonts with all of these faces being loaded up. This is a ton of font data, and I'll go into this more in just a little bit. But suffice it to say, these fonts are being loaded up. There's a ton of them. It's way too many. They're not all being used. Okay, so that's a big fail right there, because fonts are not cheap. We're talking about hundreds of kilobytes worth of data that are being loaded up and then not being used. And also it's being loaded up in a substandard manner with some repetition. Like, it's not hard to see. All right, it's not looking good, and we're just barely into the document. Now, we'll keep on rolling here. We've got a little bit of largesse there. We've got a Twitter card incorporation. We've got open graph stuff. That's usually for Facebook. We've got Yoast SEO is a plugin for SEO. It's not really necessary, and in my opinion, it's overkill. But I do appreciate the JSON LD output for schema data, which this is doing. I don't think it's helping this website or necessary at all. So to me, it adds up to largesse in this case. But here it is. That's what we're looking at there. Whatever. And then so this is interesting. We've got this style tag right here and all this stuff, this huge wall of stuff. This is CSS. This is producing all the styles that make the site look like it looks. And they're all being loaded into the document head like this. In a vacuum, this is probably the fastest way to load your CSS, instead of calling a file, which would be the normal way we would do it. We would reference a file. That way there's not all this crap in the document head. In this case, it's being stuffed in there by the use of the CDN, by Cloudflare. But what's interesting about this is that Cloudflare, in a normal, if you just activate Cloudflare on your site, it's going to attempt to smash all your CSS together and serve it as one file that's delivered from the Cloudflare CDN, and not do this inline presentation we see here. But the CSS file, this is still being attempted on this site, okay, and it's loaded up into some goofy file name here, which I could show you below. It happens somewhere. It's called somewhere here. There it is. Here's the reference, okay? So it's referenced in the document head after these inline styles are included. But the thing is triggering a 403 error because there's access is not allowed. I'll click on it to show you. There it is. It appears you don't have permission to access this page. And so some browsers will actually attempt to download it multiple times. This one has attempted to during this web page test. This file was attempted to be downloaded twice and resulted in a 403 error both times. Granted, it didn't take up too much time because the request failed out immediately because it's fast coming from Cloudflare. However, it did happen. It did produce two small errors. And, you know, my contention is that it was wholly unnecessary because the styles are already included there. So, you know, if this, then this needs to not be present. But that's obviously not the case. But we've already established that refinement is not the hallmark of this this setup. Another thing I look at. So, like, this is a favicon. This is producing this image up in the top bar. This one's 150 by 150 pixels. Generally speaking, a basic favicon does not need to be that big. I go with 64 by 64. You can make them as big as you want, but you want them to be small because you don't want to be adding to the kilobyte page load, the total, you know, total kilobytes size of the page. And so we'll look at this. This is Adam Townsend 150 by 150. Let's actually look at this resource and to see how big it is, just because. Here it is. It is 6.7 kilobytes. Now that's not that much, but I'll tell you, for that favicon, it could probably be smaller. It could probably be 1/3 the size. It could make it a little bit smaller, could make it 96 by 96, run it through an image compression tool, and then, you know, re-upload it, and it'd be a little bit smaller. You could save, you know, 58% or whatever it is, 70%, who knows. But there's probably some savings available there. I look at every one of these references on the page, everything that gets loaded up. This web page test waterfall is extremely instructive here for stuff like this because you can examine each asset individually. Like this one, for example, I showed you earlier. There's one image from the first post. Maybe it's this one. This image is extremely huge, 1.5 megabytes, and we can see that here. We can see that it took a long time to load. Like, why the heck did it take so long to load? Well, that's because it was huge. We've got a concatenated JavaScript file that gets referenced here that took, it's only 2.4 kilobytes in because it's using gzip compression, but it took 712 milliseconds to load. That's a long time in my universe. We've got another concatenated JavaScript file that took 803 milliseconds to load. That's also a long time in my universe. Now I'm going to go in, because I'm very skeptical of what I've seen, I'm going to look at these two files in the actual source to see if there's any overlap. Like, are they the same? Is it serving the same freaking thing 2 times? I don't know. Let's find out. JavaScript files should be referenced in the bottom of the document. We'll go there. So here's the A2B. So that's the first one, right? A2B, that's 803 milliseconds. Let's just look. So we've got, the WordPress emoji stuff thrown in there. We got a bunch of weird, yeah, that's all that. So everything's been smashed together. Okay, and it's huge. This goes on for days. We're not going to flip through that. Let's check this other one. And this is the lazy loader. So he's got a lazy load function for the images on his page. And this could be added by a plugin. This could be a baked-in feature into the theme. I don't know the answer to that because I'm looking at this Cloudflare document, which kind of changes the way it all looks. But regardless, you know, if he's got 8 images on the page, if they're all optimized, there's no real need for lazy loading on this site. You know, for a simple site, you just want to keep it simple. I want as few moving parts as possible. I want to use as little machinery as possible. This is basic. It should be basic. So bottom line is, now we've looked at that stuff. That second JavaScript file was tiny compared to the first one. The first one we looked at, this thing's huge, goes on for days. The second one is tiny, and yet this second one still took 700 milliseconds, 0.7 seconds just to load into the active environment. He's got some Google Analytics stuff that does its normal thing. We see a fonts.google APIs reference, which I talked about earlier. these things are all the font files that are being loaded into the active page. This is crazy to see. I never see this much font stuff. But I mean, look at the total time it takes to get all this stuff. Now, granted, they're loading in parallel here, but man, that's a lot of information. This one's 26.8 kilobytes. This one's 17.2. You know, you take an average. This one's 15. Let's say it's 18 apiece, and 18 times 18, 360, 400 kilobytes of extra load on the page for no reason. No, almost none of this is getting utilized. We got another image that takes 500 and half a second to load. That's 36.1 kilobytes. That's not bad. But you'll notice these things, each one, these do not load in parallel. They are loading, one loads, and another one loads, and another one loads. And this is the primary reason why you just don't want a ton of images on a single web page, and why you might want to use lazy loading. If you do have a lot on one page, then you really do want lazy loading, sort of. I just contradicted what I said earlier. I would just seek to make my images as small as possible. If I'm running a simple blog, I wouldn't want to introduce the extra lazy loading component unless I did some testing and saw there was massive benefit for the end user. Like I said, I want to keep as few moving parts as possible. But in a case where you do have a lot, this is why you would use lazy loading, because you're waiting on each one. It's like waiting for trains. Let's see, 423 kilobytes. This image is too fat. So look at the full scope of what's going on. We've got image optimization that needs to be done. The way these scripts and stuff are delivered, there's just a bunch of crap. There's just too much crap. The fonts, just too much stuff. The HTML markup from the theme is just too much stuff. The way these images are being incorporated, these featured images, this is called up as a Base64 reference instead of just being a direct file upload. This using the data source set. Some people like that. I mean, I haven't done enough testing on stuff like this, to be perfectly honest with you, to know what the end result differences really are, to be able to say, okay, definitively this approach is better than this approach. But this does add a bunch of, my image reference for this equivalent situation would be 2 lines here. This one's like 10 lines. Multiply that by 8 images that appear on this page, and then you realize, you've got 64 more lines, dense lines of code that need to be there. If you got rid of all that, the total HTML kilobyte loads, the total kilobyte size of this page would decrease significantly. And this is just, if you start cutting out fat, here, you cut out up in the document head, you get rid of that CSS, you get rid of a lot of other stuff, you get rid of all this crap. Before you know it, you've saved another 40, 50 kilobytes. And we might look at this and say, well, who cares? This thing was 3.1 megabytes. What's 50 kilobytes? Well, in my world, my pages are like 230 kilobytes. So if I say 50 off that, that's a big damn deal. And in addition, like I said, we're looking at something that's committed a ton of sins. We could get rid of 50 here, 50 there, 50 over here, another 300 here. Before you know it, you've cut off, 2 megabytes of stuff, and then you look back and realize, oh, I've covered a lot of ground here. We made a big difference. So anyway, this is just there's a very high-level overview of what I see when I look at a web page and kind of the tools I use and how I analyze these things. But it is clear just by looking at this, running the test, examining the HTML source, it's clear that there is just a lot happening here that doesn't need to be happening, and that's how you end up with a site that performs slowly. Large S, waste. And like I said, the way the WordPress environment works together, the way it all happens to make it easy for you, the trade-off of making it easy for you to just click a thing, add a plugin, and be happy, the trade-off is that you have a site that's super slow, and then it eventually doesn't work. And in addition to being super slow, these Frankensites, as I call them, because they're constructed with all these disparate parts, become extremely calcified and difficult to customize and maintain. And eventually it becomes so entangled that you not only need an expert to come in and help you unravel the whole thing, in many cases it's just not worth the price of admission. Like you can paint yourself into a corner and price yourself out of being able to fix your site. And eventually the only option at that point is just to blow it up. So anyway, I I just think it's instructive and important to understand the way the WordPress environment works and the types of mistakes and problems it is setting you up for if you don't know how to navigate these problems and avoid them. And in fact, this whole scenario that I've just described to you is exactly why I created my software called Focus, DIYthemes.com. Little pitch here. Focus runs this website. This is an e-commerce website. This page loads in 1.2 seconds with 0 caching. The HTML document source, let's look at it real quick just to contrast it with what we saw on Adam's site. Very small document head. It all fits right here on the screen. No problem. It fits on not even half of this screen. I've got my beautiful markup that's indented just perfectly. It's gorgeous. It's tiny. It's 174 lines of stuff. And this site makes a lot of money, and this page makes a lot of money. This is a great web page. This page is so good because it is built on Focus. Focus commits 0 sins up front, and in fact sets you up to excel. For example, if you incorporate Google Fonts, it's going to do the process I described of prefetching and then calling up those fonts in the way that renders the fastest. So Focus is not only not committing the same basic sins that everyone else is committing, it's actually setting you up for success with the actions that you do take. The only thing I can't defend against is plugin largesse and you just slapping all that stuff in there and saying, hey, let's do this. In reality, that outweighs any of the optimizations I make at the theme level. You adding 50 plugins is going to smash anything I do here. So, you know, making this transaction work is on both of us. I provide you with the optimized base that can be massively configured to be awesome at all times, but the other half of that transaction is you have to not commit a bunch of profligate sins when you construct your website. So anyway, there it is. That's what I see when I look at a website. This is why I build the stuff that I build, is to fight these types of problems and to make it so that everyone who runs a WordPress website has an opportunity to build something that is highly performant, loads immediately for visitors regardless of the device they're using, and can actually be managed over time, which is probably the most underrated aspect of this whole thing. Like you might want to have a site that looks a certain way and does these things, but the reality is when you have that delivered to you, you have a new reality right away. You actually have to run the damn thing. And if you can't make little changes and adaptations, and if it loads slowly, and if you don't know how to do anything on your website once this stuff is the case, then you have a real problem on your hands. And I don't want to see you get trapped in that situation. So that's why I do what I do. That's what this is about. And hopefully now you've got some insight into what I see when I look at a website. All right. Thanks for listening today, and I hope you learned something.